Greetings, Larson Halleck here, and let's talk about comics, nerds. Longtime fans are probably well aware of the fact that despite being an egregiously masculine man who has succeeded at most things men dream of, I'm still basically a huge nerd. And in another world, perhaps I would have a blog purely devoted to video games or comic books or film or various other forms of nerdery. However, due to the world being what it is, my blog is about masculinity and philosophy. But sometimes the silly world of nerddom is still relevant to what my mission is in the now. I have at various points discussed the dismal state of comic books, how something that should be a heroic mythology for the children of today is rapidly becoming the same sort of finger-waggling, social justice school marming that the kids already get from everywhere else. Superhero movies may not have it yet, but the comics certainly do. And you can bet your ass that they're going to cram this nonsense into the movies as soon as they can get a chance. It goes without saying that the superhero comics of the past are better than the ones today, as evidenced by the fact that the popular Marvel movies were not based on the current stories, but they were all, without exception, based on the stories of decades past. Even the social justice warriors running the show now realize that they have to sneak their leftist agitprop into their productions gradually, and only after they've engrossed people with good old-fashioned two-fisted heroism. But what if I told you that I recently found out that even the most random, seemingly corny and unheroic comic books of the past displayed true masculine virtue and red-blooded heroics better than the superhero crap they put out nowadays? Allow me to introduce you to Peter Wheat, the mascot of the eponymous bread company, and star of a 55-issue comic book series that ran from the late 1940s to the mid-1950s. Just to clarify for those of you not catching on, yes, I'm going to talk about a comic book about a bread mascot. Peter Wheat is literally a corporate shill who's trying to sell you flour and cookies and bread. And yes, Peter Wheat is, to paraphrase the words of Sean Baby, a creepy-looking elf in a Pope hat who lives in a world of cupcakes. But we're going to ignore those glaring deficiencies in his character, because young Mr. Wheat is an absolute death machine. The creepy-looking flower elf, or perhaps, if one wants to alliterate, Bread Brownie or Durham Duende, fights hornets, birds of prey, fish, and other enemies of his people with such ferocity and valor that his advertising adventures are genuinely interesting to read, in large part due to being written and drawn by the famous Walt Kelly, most famous for Pogo. More to the point, given the choice between reading this delightful bread nonsense of the 1950s or the undelightful social justice nonsense of the 2010s, I would not only advocate reading Peter Wheat myself, but I would recommend him as a far greater hero to young children than any modern incarnation of superheroes. Don't believe me? Here's a few select pages. My sword is the best friend I've ever had. Just to point this out, again, this is a bread advertisement espousing the riddle of steel. Also note that the woman is also getting her hands dirty in the fighting. You don't need ham-fisted crapola to make strong female characters in comic books. So here's a scene of Peter Wheat pulling absolutely no punches in combat. He turns himself invisible, hits the guy low, and then just starts stomping him when he's down. Obviously, we at the Barbaric Gentleman do not advocate violence. I have repeatedly espoused avoiding it at all costs. But should you be forced to be in a real fight, you hit the SOB with everything you've got and you don't stop. Now, does that look like the face of a wuss who has any self-doubt? Hell no. Also note that when he gets word of a threat, he doesn't hesitate to put himself at risk and lead from the front. Peter Wheat is in fact the prince of the, wheat people. Even when you're the size of a tampon, a true leader knows he leads from the front. So in this panel, Peter reacts to a capsizing raft by leaping off of it and stabbing a giant river beast, an otter, in the face. Honestly, I would like to see Femme Thor or Down Syndrome Squirrel Girl try anything like this. In this page, Peter engages in some classic Count of Monte Cristo or Prisoner of Zenda style chandelier-swinging heroics. Except Peter Wheat, who is again 3 inches tall, one-ups Edmond Dantes or Rudolph Rassendyll with just a little hint of petty sadism, going out of his way to pour hot wax on his hornet foes when he could have just kept running. 0 fucks given. Think about how heavy a wagon wheel is, proportionately speaking, and think about how much force you would have to exert to hurl one into somebody's face. That Hornet Knight could not possibly be any more dead. As you can see in this panel, all of Peter Wheat's people are little savages. And finally, here's a cookie advertisement showing a gopher being stabbed in the throat. Pretty amazing how something that should be the epitome of horniness, literally and figuratively, get it, bread joke, sorry, ends up being surprisingly awesome. Just goes to show that even hacky corporate nonsense can be made good if you have enough talent and creativity. And the example of modern day superhero comics shows that even something hallowed and heroic can become terrible with untalented hacks behind it pushing an agenda. Perhaps Peter Wheat was made in a day and age that venerated virtue and heroism. This was immediately post-World War II after all, and superhero comics today are made in an age of weakness and decadence, and the trends in society are reflected even in works for children. It shows how poorly the media, as well as the culture on the whole, has degenerated since those halcyon days, and it shows the necessity and the craving of children for heroic mythology, even if it is in the form of an overall-clad elf who sells bread. I'm Larson Halleck, and I think I have a new hero.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Hello, are you a fan of Larson Halleck and the Barbaric Gentleman? Of course you are, otherwise you wouldn't be watching. Would you like to help the channel grow? Would you like to help me out? If so, here's how you can. You can go to patreon.com/LarsonHalleck and join the ranks of these illustrious heroes. You can also go to www.paypal.me/LarsonHalleck to also donate some money. You can also buy my book. The Patreon, the PayPal, and the link to my book are all found in the video description. You can also follow me on Twitter or on Instagram. I no longer advertise my Gab because Gab sucks. Otherwise, enjoy, keep watching the videos, and spread the word.